Aveva Cesare, Virgilio ed Augusto.
This guy promised to restore Italy's ancient glory, but instead he dragged the nation into humiliation, ruin, and straight-up pain. His demise? It was as bad as the painter, or even worse, some might say. Subscribe now because we're talking about a man lost in history. Rise of Mussolini. Back in the 1920s, Italy was a country that was on the edge of collapse. The First World War had ended, but the promised rewards never really came. Soldiers returned home to find no jobs. There was inflation everywhere, and broken political promises were on the rise. Strikes destroyed entire cities, and socialist and communist movements were everywhere. The government seemed powerless to restore order, and it was utter chaos. But into the chaos there was Benito Mussolini, who was a former socialist journalist who reinvented himself as a national strongman. He called himself the Duce, or the leader. He promised all the Italians that he would make their country powerful again, and that they would restore the greatness of ancient Rome. On October 28, 1922, Mussolini organized the March on Rome. That's where thousands of his black-shirted fascist followers were marching in the capital city to show their power. King Victor Emmanuel III, who was holding everything at that time, was fearing another civil war and made a catastrophic decision. Instead of ordering the army to stop the march, he instead invited Mussolini to form a government together. Most of the Italians welcomed the change. Trains were running on time, street violence had already decreased, and Mussolini even built grand public works and gave passionate speeches about how he would restore the order of the world, specifically in their country. But beneath the surface, he was planning to destroy democracy, control the press, and crush opposition in a way they would never expect. He was trying to turn Italy into a totalitarian state where even the slightest bit of criticism meant imprisonment or even death. The Empire. By the late 1930s, Mussolini's ambitions were growing dangerously out of control, and the world was slowly getting to understand why. Ruling Italy wasn't enough. He wanted an empire that would rival ancient Rome, stretching across Africa and even the Mediterranean. He believed that war would make Italy feared and respected on the world level. Then, in October 1935, Italian forces invaded Ethiopia, which was one of the independent nations in Africa. What Mussolini envisioned as a quick and glorious conquest became a brutal campaign of mass violence and just straight-up brutalism. Italian planes dropped poison gases on civilian villages, which was a weapon banned by international law. Tens of thousands of Ethiopians, including women and children, were killed instantly. Emperor Haile Selassie fled into exile, appealing desperately to the League of Nations for help. The League condemned Italy and imposed economic sanctions, but they were quite unfazed. Crucially, oil, which is Italy's powerful war machine, was never embargoed. Many countries still continued trading with Italy in secret, and Mussolini won control over Ethiopia, but at an enormous cost, which we will cover in a bit. Italy became internationally isolated and was seen as a rogue nation that was led by a dangerous dictator called Mussolini. But here's what made everything worse. The Ethiopian victory convinced Mussolini that he was invincible, and we all know what happens when the dictator thinks that he is immortal. It pushes him directly into the arms of none other than Adolf Hitler, which happened with a lot of people back in the day. The brutal alliance. By 1936, Italy and Germany formed what Mussolini called the Rome-Berlin Axis. He and Hitler decided to form a party together because they admired each other's ruthlessness and shared visions of conquest and totalitarian control. Their partnership became official in May 1939 by signing the Pact of Steel, a military alliance promising mutual support in all future wars. From that moment, Italy's fate was sealed. It wasn't going to be saved at all. Mussolini had tied his country's destiny to Hitler's ambition, and there was no turning back. When World War II erupted in 1939, Mussolini initially stayed neutral. He was waiting to see who would win and who he could join forces with. But after Germany's stunning victory across Europe in the spring of 1940, he was there for them. Germany had conquered France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Norway in a matter of weeks. Mussolini just couldn't resist joining what looked like the winning side. On June 10, 1940, Italy declared war on Britain and France, and Mussolini expected an easy victory. What he instead got was total domination and humiliation. Italy's military was quite unprepared for modern warfare, and it wasn't World War I anymore. It was actually World War II. Many soldiers carried outdated rifles. The tanks were poorly designed and imploded. The Air Force had obsolete planes that were way too old. Supply chains were all chaos, and communication systems failed regularly. In North Africa, Italian forces were quickly routed by the smaller British units. In Greece, they were supposed to have a lightning conquest, but that turned into a disaster when Greek troops fought back fiercely, pushing Italian forces back into Albania. Hitler even had to send German troops to rescue Mussolini's army, which was an absolute embarrassment of an army that revealed Italy's military weakness to the entire world. Back home, conditions changed quickly too. By 1942, Allied bombing campaigns were devastating, destroying Italian cities and factories, and even production stopped. The economy collapsed, and food became scarce. Families waited in hours-long lines for bread and potatoes. Soldiers even wrote desperate letters home, begging for food and warm clothing, and yet Mussolini refused to face reality because he was in a delusion of his own, thinking that he was invincible and would turn the tide of the war easily. What would finally break his grip on power? The answer came after an invasion Mussolini never thought was even possible. Before we reveal what happens, subscribe to this channel because what's coming next is shocking. Beginning of the end. It was July 9th, 1943, when Allied forces launched what they called Operation Husky. This was a complete invasion of Sicily, and nearly 160,000 American, British, and Canadian troops landed on Italian soil. The Italian army was exhausted and demoralized, offering minimal resistance. Within just over a month, Sicily fell completely. The loss was everywhere in Italy, and Allied planes were now bombing Rome itself, which was the city that Mussolini promised to restore to its greatness. Panic was everywhere in the government buildings, and even within Mussolini's own fascist party. Then, on July 24, 1943, Mussolini called a meeting of the fascist Grand Council, where he expected loyalty as he had received for over 2 decades. Instead, one by one, even the closest allies of his turned against him, blaming him for Rome's disaster and for the thousands of deaths, for the destruction of the country. After hours of bitter debate, they voted to remove him from power, with the result being 19 votes against him and 7 in his favor. The next day, on July 25, Mussolini was summoned to meet King Victor Emmanuel, and he expected support. Instead, even the king dismissed him and ordered his immediate arrest. Guards took him away, and they didn't even protect him, but imprisoned him in the worst way possible. It was so clear that the man's downfall was coming. When the news broke, Italians were celebrating everywhere. People were in the streets, tearing down his portraits. Church bells were ringing everywhere, and across the country, after 21 years of complete dictatorship and censorship, Italy was finally free. But the story was still far from over. Adolf Hitler was quite angry when he heard about Mussolini's arrest, because according to him, losing Italy meant losing control of the whole Mediterranean and exposing Germany's southern flank. Hitler then ordered the immediate rescue operation. German intelligence located Mussolini at the Grand Sassou Hotel, which was a remote mountain resort that seemed quite safe at that time. On September 12, 1943, German commandos executed one of the war's most daring raids, using gliders to land directly beside the hotel without firing a single shot. They even stormed the building and found Mussolini alive, but he was shaken within hours. He was flown to safety in a small plane, but this wasn't really freedom. It was a different kind of imprisonment that he himself didn't expect. Hitler installed Mussolini as the puppet leader of the Italian Social Republic, also known as the Republic of Salo. It was based in northern Italy, and there Mussolini had a title but no real power. German officers made all the decisions, and any Italian who went against them was basically executed. Mussolini became exactly what he once despised, which was a powerless figure controlled by a foreign power. Final end. Then came April 1945, and the end was quite obvious to everyone except Mussolini himself, because he was so deluded in his own self. Allied forces were pushing north through Italy, and they were liberating city after city from the east. The Soviet forces were crushing Germany, forcing Hitler's armies into full retreat. The excess powers were getting destroyed and annihilated. Northern Italy also descended into chaos, and from there, towns were getting destroyed, people were getting killed, and civilians fled the violence, feeling that they would lose their lives. Even the fascist leaders who were once so loyal to Mussolini that they would rather die than leave his party found ways to save themselves, or they would quietly surrender or flee to Switzerland, which was the safest place in the world during the wars in history. In Milan, partisan resistance groups, which were ordinary Italians, including factory workers, farmers, students, and women who lost everything to the war, rose up in force. They were fighting in secret for years, and now they had their chance. On April 25, 1945, the partisans launched a huge uprising across northern Italy and Milan. They seized key buildings, took over the radio station, and were waiting to get their hands on Mussolini, who was hiding in Salo. He understood that his rule was over, and even Hitler was trapped in his Berlin bunkers while being days away from his own end. The end. Then came April 25, when Mussolini made his final decision to run away. He gathered his mistress, Claretta Petacci, a few personal guards, and a handful of fascist officials. They planned to escape towards Switzerland, hoping to cross the border and reach neutral territory. The situation here was hopeless. Roads were clogged with retreating German troops. Allied planes bombed highways, and partisans controlled nearly every single town on the route. In a desperate attempt to hide, Mussolini was dressed in a German military coat and helmet, pretending to be just another soldier. He sat quietly in a truck that was filled with German soldiers, and his wife stayed by his side, refusing to leave, no matter what happened. But the disguise failed. On April 27, 1945, they were found near Lake Como, and Mussolini, even though he was trying to hide, was exposed. They were taken from there to a small farmhouse in the village of Giglino de Mesegre, where it was a cold, tense night. Inside, Mussolini and Petacci sat silently, knowing that there was no escape. Some argued for a proper trial, believing justice should follow legal procedures, but most couldn't accept the years of suffering. And that's where the infamous clip of both of them comes when they get sentenced to death. Around 4:10 p.m., the order was given. Gunfire shattered the silence, and Mussolini and Petacci fell to the ground. The man who had called himself the restorer of the Roman Empire was dead already. But the brutality didn't stop there. The bodies of Mussolini and his wife, along with others, were loaded onto an open truck and driven into the city. People were so angry at him that they started stomping on his dead body with clubs available on the internet. They got stomped so bad that his face was unrecognizable, and Italy was happy about what happened. German forces in Italy also surrendered to the Allies, officially ending the war. And cities like Milan and Turin were in ruins, but at least the fighting had stopped. Even King Victor Emmanuel III fell into exile, but even in his death, Mussolini remained controversial. His family pleaded for a proper burial, but he didn't even get that. All he got was a lot of hate, stomping, and utter pain, even in his final moments. Do you think things could have been better if he had gotten a proper trial? Let us know in the comments down below, and subscribe to the channel because we are about to expose the most controversial figures of the past.